So as Graham said, Geoff and I today are going to talk about client-directed outcome-informed approach, or CDOI, to problem gambling interventions. We're looking at the ORS and SRS data for clients who have been seeking assistance for gambling problems from the Problem Gambling Foundation. So today I'll run through firstly the aims and objectives of the research project, and then have a quick look at an overview of the ORS, the outcome rating scale, and the SRS, the session rating scale. And as you probably are aware by now, these tools are part of Duncan and Miller's client-directed outcome-informed approach, or Partners for Change outcome management system, PCOMS, as Graham alluded to before. Then we'll have a bit of an overview of PGF's use of the ORS and the SRS, and then I'll hand over to Geoff, who will talk about the more exciting stuff, the findings, which gives you a little bit of a snapshot actually of a paper that we're working on to try and get published in a peer-reviewed journal, because there'll be much more information in that article itself. And then we'll just do some summary and conclusions. So the aims and objectives of this project really was to examine the relationships between PGF client characteristics, and by that we mean in particular culture, gender, and the number of sessions that a client has attended, and how that relates to client outcomes and scores for the outcome rating scale and the session rating scale. So to give you an overview of the ORS and SRS, and I apologise to those of you who are already familiar with these tools. As I said before, they're part of Duncan and Miller's client-directed outcome-informed approach, or the Partners for Change outcome management system. These screens, so the ORS on your left and the SRS on your right, they measure client outcomes, and what's really important is that they do this session by session. So they form a constant feedback system that allows to build on a therapeutic alliance between clients and practitioners. And this is something that we know is really important in terms of improving therapeutic effectiveness. They've both been used widely internationally, as per Barry Duncan's keynote. They're available in 24 different languages, and they've been well validated against a number of other standardised and reputable measures of mental health. So they're very simple to use. They're both used in each session. Each scale has 4 subscales. You can see that they're 10 centimetres long. They look much bigger up there. The ORS is used at the beginning of the session. Clients make a mark on each of the lines to indicate how they're feeling in terms of their individual or personal well-being, interpersonally, socially, and overall. Each of those subscales has a score of 0 to 10, resulting in a total score of 0 to 40. The SRS on your right, the same process is followed, and it's filled out in regard to the relationship with the counsellor, the goals and topics, the approach or method that's been used, and overall. So again, 4 scales, 0 to 10, and a total of 0 to 40. We also have a number of benchmark measures, both for the ORS and the SRS, and I'm just going to talk about ORS because that's what most of our results are about today. If a client has a total score of less than 25, we talk about that being clinically significant distress, and this is similar to a diagnosis of depression. If there's a 5-point change between the first and last evaluation, so the very first time that you see a client and the last time that you see a client, we talk about there being improvement. And these have been internationally developed and looked at. If there's a 5-point change between the first and last evaluations and there was initial ORS of less than 25, we talk about clinically significant improvement. If there's no change, we're talking about plus or minus a 5-point change between the first and last ORS sessions, and deterioration, a more than 5-point decline between first and last ORS evaluations. Now that's quite a lot to remember. I don't expect you to remember each of those exactly. There will be no test, but it is relevant to what Geoff's going to talk about, and he'll remind you gently, I'm sure, about what they mean. Okay, so just have a quick look at PGF's use of ORS SRS. Basically, there's a really large and very comprehensive sample that we have. We could only find one other database that was comparable, and that was not for gambling clients. So we were looking at 4 years of data. There is more data than that, obviously, given it's 2016 now. But we were looking from the end of 2010 through to the end of 2014. In total, we had 17,814 sessions with individual clients. So we had that many data sets for the ORS. We had slightly less, just under 17,000 complete data sets for the SRS. And we also had a number of anomalies, it was quite a very small number actually, within the data set of zero scores, which we decided were, when we looked further into them, were data entry errors basically, so they were excluded. So this data was collected from 86 counsellors, and 83% of those counsellors had seen more than 20 clients, and 43% had seen more than 80 clients, so a pretty experienced bunch of people really. And I'll also just say too that the analysis we were looking at only relates to individual client sessions. So even though these tools are used in group settings and couple sessions, we were only looking at the individual sessions. In terms of the characteristics of these clients, they ranged in age from 11 to 95 years, an average of 41.5 years and a median of 40.4. 57% were male and 43% were female, and we had 2 transgendered clients in there as well. In terms of ethnicity, a quarter identified as being New Zealanders, a fifth identified as being Māori, 15% Pacific, 12% European origin, 11% Chinese origin. Those are just the 5 largest groups. We also had clients who identified as being African or Middle Eastern, from the Indian subcontinent, other Asian, Korean, and not specified. And at that point, I'm going to hand over to Geoff. I'm going to have a sit down.
Right, so here's our first graph, and it's the ORS scores by number of sessions. Now, there are some benchmarks. We'll deal with the top line, which is the ORS and SRS, which is the SRS scores. So the benchmarks for SRS are if you have a score of 39 or 40, that's out of 40, it means you've got an excellent therapeutic alliance. If you have a score of 35 to 38, you've got a reasonable therapeutic alliance. If your score is 34 or below, you've got a poor therapeutic alliance. So what we've got up here, let's see, I'm doing the wrong thing. Back. Am I going the right way? No. All right. Okay. Oh, no, what am I doing? I'm going the wrong way. Okay. Here's the laser thing there. Yeah. Okay, so here's our scores here, and you can see that we're starting in session, the early sessions, well below what would be considered a good therapeutic alliance. And we gradually climb up to that area, but it takes quite a long time to do that. And at the end, we would have data that's in the area of a good therapeutic alliance. But not necessarily perfect 39 or 40, it's still below that area. So in terms of the benchmarks for SRS, there's still work to be done. The ORS scores, they start down here at 24, and you can see that they rise quite rapidly up to about session 6, and then they're pretty flat right through to session 18 to 40, and there's a little bit of a bump at the end, which is not really that important because it only amounts to, for this group here, to another 17 sessions. So there's a rise here of about 5.6 ORS, which in broad terms meets the criteria of improvement. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about what this means in subsequent slides. So what we wanted to do was to compare Problem Gaming Foundation data with another big, what the Americans call public behavioural health service. And this group here from ResetL study, Southwestern Behavioural Health Service, has been using the ORS for a comparable period of time, very large data set, and they also picked up another study from a university counselling centre which wasn't using the ORS but was using another outcome measure which they could compare their data with. They also wanted to compare their data with clinical trial studies, particularly around depression, and they used measures, particularly Cohen's D, which we'll come on to, which allowed them to compare their work across a whole range of data sets, some to do with institutional services and their data that just comes out of that work, and some to do with actual clinical trials where you would kind of expect better outcomes, if you like, than business as usual. So those are two groups that we are comparing our data with. Again. Off. Okay. Try again. All right. So here are the three groups: the Southwestern Behavioural Services Group, University Counselling Centre, and the Problem Gambling Foundation of New Zealand. The first thing that we're interested in is the numbers that we're starting with. We haven't got that data for the UCC group, but you can see they're starting with 8,000 clients in SBHS, and Problem Gambling has got 4,000, just over 4,000. So the first interesting point is how many drop out after session one, because you heard from Barry Duncan that typically we lose 50% of our clients after from the first session. That's data from the States, Canada, Britain, and Australia, around the world. SBHS had 63% of their clients on the session 2 or greater, and Problem Gambling Foundation had 68%. So we had a dropout rate of about 31–32%, which is pretty good. Now, the next thing is the clients within the clinical range. Now, Fiona said that the benchmark for clinical range is that on their first assessment, they scored below 25 on the ORS. The Southwestern Behavioural Services Study, 73% in that clinical range. Problem Gambling Foundation, 50%. So it's showing you a different client group. Yes, this is a mental health service, the Southwestern one. It's a mental health service when we're comparing it with a gambling service. I'll just list that column here on Cohen's D, and I'll come back to it. But the mean change in the ORS score. So we've got a mean change in the SBHS data of 5.81, and in the Problem Gambling Foundation of New Zealand 6.57. Now we said before that we were getting up to an average of a 5-point change, 5.5-point change in that first graph. This is data that only looks at the change from people who went beyond session 1. So that's a slightly better change than in the behavioural health service. Those who are clinically successful. Now, the term clinically successful simply means those who made improvement, those who made a 5 So in the behavioural services, 31%, counselling services, 27%, and Problem Gambling Foundation, 32%. So again, looking good. And then here, these are the people who are clinically successful in the clinical range. So they have a 5-point improvement, but they have to start below 25 at the beginning. So these are the people that we would normally, in a mental health service, be the people who are coming in with some form of depression, anxiety. Sure, Barry Duncan presentation with the video that we had, that the woman coming in with depression as a result of marriage issues, starting off with a score of 21. And that's reasonably typical. So here we have clinically successful in the clinical range, 43%, Problem Gambling Foundation, 63%. And then the final thing here is how long did it take these services to get the result that they did? For the behavioural services, 10 sessions, for problem gambling, 6 sessions. That looks altogether pretty good. Then we've come over here. This is the important measure that services are using these days to look at the effect size. Because you can get a significant result, but it may not mean a lot. The impact of that significant result may not change much. So there's a measure called Cohen's D, which is used and benchmarks have been set for Cohen's D. So typically a score of Cohen's D of 0.2 means a very weak effect. It might be significant, but a weak effect. A score of 0.5 means a moderate effect. A score of 0.8 means it's a strong effect. And what we're getting in the, wrong way. Help. What we're getting with the behavioural health services, an effect of 0.71, and for problem gambling services, an effect of 0.69. That's overall the people who go on to more than one session. So again, very good comparable results. The only thing here is that this data is actually got a lot more variability in it than that data there. Okay, moving on. And here's the graphs which are showing the clients who are clinically successful over sessions. And so clinically successful again is those who make a 5-point improvement. So there's the percent. So what you've got in 2 sessions, you get 20% roughly making a 5-point gain. In 6 sessions, it'll go up to 40% and so on. And then at the far end, you're probably getting 60-70% making that kind of improvement, but for a lot of sessions. So what we're seeing is that generally the problem gambling services and the behavioural health services are pretty much the same in the first 6 sessions. Problem gambling seems to do better at the after 6 sessions, and certainly better than the university counselling services. If we look at it overall, okay, here's the ones that are clinically successful. So these are not necessarily starting below 25, but they're making a 5-point gain. And you can see that in the previous table we had a 20% advantage for problem gambling. That exists right across these sessions. So it doesn't matter whether we're doing 1 or 2 sessions or doing 17 sessions. The advantage for problem gambling over the other 2 services is about 20%. the effects in relation to cultural group and also in terms of gender. So down the bottom we can just see very quickly the proportion of clients in each group. We've got one group here on the this side here. Oh gosh, sorry. So the first group over here on your left is what we call the Asian group, and it also includes a very small number of African clients. The second group here is all the rest, the main non-Asian populations of New Zealand. The third chunk here is looking at those clients in the clinical range, and then we've got the gender comparisons as well. So what we can see, one thing we're seeing is that the Asian group is making less progress. They're starting higher, that's the Chinese, than the non-Asian group, but the actual change is less. These are starting lower, the change is greater. And that's a bit of a puzzle to us because the SBHS stuff also included an Asian group, and the Asian group is the best. Now, most important here is this, again, this effect size. This is this little green worm that's running across here, and we can see that the effect size, again, for the non-Asian group is around about, over here, around about 0.8, which means it's strong, whereas here, the effect size is probably around about 0.5, 0.6, which is moderate or even below moderate, particularly for the Chinese group. So that's an issue that we probably want to address and see what was happening. And the Unitec database of Problem Gambling Foundation has got so much material in it. I'm sure that some answers will come once we get a chance to look at it. What's most impressive is this here. Half of the clients fall within this clinical range of less than 25 beginning point. And that's their effect size. It's huge. It's better than the effect size you're getting from most clinical trials for depression. So that's a very encouraging result. And as I say, that's nearly half of the clients of Problem Gambling Foundation New Zealand. And over here, men and women, no difference. Difference here in terms of the proportion of clients, but no difference in the overall effect size. So that brings us to the conclusion.
So basically, I guess, yeah, we're really excited by this project and by this data set, and it's, as far as we're aware, the first large-scale analysis of this approach, the PCOMs for gambling counselling, both internationally and within New Zealand. And also it's the only long-term outcome analysis of any publicly funded mental health or drug addiction service in New Zealand. As Geoff said before, the scores from the SRS and the data relating to that suggest that while things are going pretty well, there's more that could be done to enhance that therapeutic alliance. And obviously there's some differences by culture, which we don't know what they mean or why they're happening, and yeah, we're looking forward to working with colleagues and probing into that a little bit around what might be underlying those differences. And overall, I guess just that it seems really promising that PGF outcomes are meeting or exceeding the international benchmarks that have been identified in other research. In particular, as Geoff said, the Cohen's D that we see within clinical trials for depression, PGF is matching that. It's as impressive as that. So, and yeah, so particularly strong results for those clients who are in that clinical range. For depression, the most unwell group.
as a sort of outsider here, coming in to do work at PGF, what is incredibly impressive is that this organisation has had the courage to set up the system, get its own staff using the system, do it for 4 years, and now come out with the data, which is internationally very unique, not only in gambling, it's pretty unique for major institutional mental health and addiction services. So I just have to congratulate PGFNZ for leading the way.
Graham, did you want to say?
Here in the session, but I'm also part of the team. And I just wanted to say that you see the word outcomes there, and you've heard the ministry talking about outcomes agreements. This is not the basis of an outcome agreement, but it may actually add to it. And we need to do a lot of work to get to understand it, and so with the ministry with us. So there's a lot of promise in that, but these people are helping us understand it, and we think there's probably quite a few months more work before we really understand things and would be able to write something into an agreement for services.